Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this virtual lunch and learn session. Hopefully, the lunch is not virtual; it's a real lunch, and the learning is real as well. So, what we're going to do today is to explore this world of contact centers, which is an exciting world today, given everything that's happening. It's become the new battleground, so to speak, in terms of driving customer experiences and what have you. And what we thought we would do today is turn our focus a little bit on technology. It's just an introduction of some of the technologies that are starting to help organizations to realize their customer experience visions, especially as it comes to how these are being applied in a contact center kind of situations. So clearly, while we don't want everyone trying to be deeply technical about it, the whole idea was to give you an introduction of what these next generation of technologies look like, how are they being orchestrated together to solve some of the problems that are confronting the industry. So it's going to be at a fairly high level, and it's going to be exploratory in terms of figuring out what is the art of the possible from a customer experience standpoint as to start to leverage these interesting technologies. And then we'll give you a sense of what best-in-class customer experience from a contact center perspective looks like as well. And we'll conclude this session with a few examples and share experiences of the impact that a modernized contact center has made for our enterprise clients, for the customer service representatives, as well as for the end customer that they are ultimately servicing. So there's a fair bit of ground that we're going to cover. And to cover that ground, I have my colleague, Greg Weber. Greg is the CTO of Eventus Solutions Group. Eventus is another exciting company that the Tech Mahindra Group acquired earlier this year. Both Eventus and Greg at the helm from a technology standpoint have done extensive work in terms of creating the roadmaps and visions to deliver great contact center experiences. So they operate both from a process standpoint as well as from a technology standpoint. And they've looked at how do you put these operating models, how do you put these technologies together to drive this signature experiences for customers, right? So that's what it is. So without much ado, I'd leave it to Greg to take you through in the next 30 to 40 minutes of his roadmap, and then we'll take some questions from all of you. So thank you, Greg, all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Looking forward to discussing with you guys what we call the Modernized Contact Center Framework and how we actually deliver the orchestrated customer experience. We're going to stay at a high level, but we're going to go really fast and try to get us back on track in terms of timing here. So when we start talking about the contact center of the future, we got the timeline, right? What happened in the past, where the future is going, and what have you. So if I'm going to pick an arbitrary point of time to start discussing contact centers, I'm going to start off with the Big Bang. The universe was a singularity, and all of a sudden there was an explosion. We had planets, and they were evolving, and eventually dinosaurs were roaming around those planets. They aimlessly roamed around looking for food, trying to hit their objectives, and evolution took over. And apes, the cognitive apes, they started solving problems. They started trying out things and doing things better, trying out things, doing things better. And eventually they came up with stone tools. Stone tools are able to help us get things done faster, work on a certain project and expedite how fast it happened. And we were so happy about how this productivity was happening. We had to tell everybody about it. So the printing press was invented. The written word, it was distributed out locally, and eventually you wanted to get that word out to further places. So airplanes were invented. They were able to ship all these newspapers everywhere. And ironically, the flying machines, those airplanes did so well, they needed contact centers, and they needed to start dealing with people booking tickets and figuring out where to travel. Now, I'm pretty sure you're not going to spend your lunch wanting to hear about the Big Bang and apes and tools and what have you. But the reason I kind of start here is these are very in parallel to the technology shifts that we're experiencing. For example, when we start talking about digital transformation, it is just like the Big Bang. Anything that happened before really doesn't apply in the future. It's a totally different landscape. We need to rethink everything of how we're going to be designing our technologies and designing our different experiences within this digital world. And when we start talking about aimlessly roaming dinosaurs looking for food, aimlessly roaming for anything is not a great experience. So we're now doing these customer journeys. We're figuring out how to optimize it and make it a win-win for both the client and the enterprise at the same time. And we talked about the cognitive apes trying to solve problems, trial and error, and getting better. That's exactly what AI is doing. It's matching patterns, figuring out what works best, trying it out, and then moving that into a process. And I think we live in a world today where there's way too many tools anyway. What's really important is how we orchestrate the usage of all of those different tools into a workflow orchestration to drive the outcomes that we're looking for. And the written word is interesting. Newspapers are great, but we're obviously moving into what we call omni-channel engagement. It means when I have a written paper and I'm discussing it and I'm talking about it and I'm interacting with a contact center representative, we're sitting here looking at an omni-channel experience, meaning that we're cohesive and coherent around all of our interactions. And these flying machines, well, they were in the cloud. Maybe that one's a little bit of a stretch. But the point being is, when we start looking at digital transformation, customer journeys, artificial intelligence, workflow orchestration, omni-channel, and cloud, the ACD, the automatic call distributor, and the CRM, the customer relationship management system, are now evolving into what we call a modernized contact center framework. So let's take a look at it. When we start talking about a digital world, what does that mean to contact centers? The best way I know how to describe this is through the eyes of my daughter. She's a 13-year-old princess, and the first thing is we were driving up to the mountains one day, and in the back seat, my daughter announced, she goes, "I want to watch episode 3, season 2 of Mako Mermaids." My wife and I looked at each other and we almost giggled, because when we were growing up, we could play the license plate game and look out the window. And then all of a sudden, my daughter's asking for content on demand. And ironically, she was able to get it, and she wasn't even talking to us. She was talking to her iPad anyway. The point is there was no delay in terms of getting the services that she wanted. My mother-in-law, on the other hand, is quite happy if the time in queue is less than 30 minutes. She's ecstatic. My daughter expects this content to be there immediately, on demand, in the digital world. The second thing is just even understanding how to use the technology, things that we just take for granted. One day, I was dropping off my daughter at school. She was on her cell phone talking to her mother, and I pulled up into the hug and go lane. And I told her, I go, "You got to hang up the phone. We got to get to class. You're going to be late." We get out of the car, but rather than hugging me, she asked me, "Why is it called hang up?" She had never seen a phone hang up, but yet we think about that when we're designing contact centers. The whole paradigm of how fast this technology is happening is mind-blowing, and we need to accommodate for it. How fast is it going? My father actually invented the 1-800 number, and my daughter has never heard dial tone. That is technology foundations changing very quickly, and we have to accommodate for that in the digital world. The last part is what they value. I talked to my daughter and a bunch of her friends, and I did a little thought experiment. I offered them either $5 or 100 gems. I didn't tell them what the gems were for, not what application, what it was going to get them, and they all picked that virtual gem currency of what have you. So even the things that they value are totally different than they were in that analog world. So what's driving this? There's a lot of things that are out there that are driving, obviously, the digital world. But one of the big things that's affecting contact centers is the mobile paradigm. The mobile device has opened up a lot of things. And the two most important things to consider when interacting with a contact center is, number one, is the new channels that were created, right? Grandma's kitchen phone could call an agent and talk to an IVR, and a computer could do email and go to websites. But it was really the mobile device that encapsulated all of those, plus a lot of new channels, right? You're looking at your social, your apps, and what have you. Now, having a bunch of channels is interesting, but that just tends to lead to a very convoluted experience unless we really start thinking about an omni-channel journey, a cohesive, coherent experience across all those channels. So what does a contact center need to do to establish that? Well, number one is sometimes you're talking automated services. We're obviously growing in the automated world a lot. We'll discuss that in a few minutes. And then if you're getting into a live agent, how do the live agent and the automated services provide that great customer experience? There are some foundational elements that we're going to discuss today. It all starts with workflow orchestration. How do I ensure that anytime there's a call, an email, a chat, an engagement, that we're actually part of a journey, part of an orchestrated workflow? How do we ensure that knowledge and outcomes are built into those orchestrations? And how do we actually get actionable insights to improve those processes over time? These workflows have to happen in real time, no delays. We want to not create 30-minute, 40-minute on hold times to figure out anything. We need these to be real-time decisioning, and we're going to leverage AI in order to make those real-time decisions even more efficient. So what does that leave us kind of at the highest level? What's happened over the 90s and the 2000s and the like was really the concept of anytime, anywhere, any channel. Doesn't matter, you're mobile, call whenever, interact whenever, text whenever, and use any channel that you prefer. We're now moving into a world where it's really about productive, predictive, and personalized types of experiences. So let's look at kind of the challenges your IT group is having with this. So when you talk about having a vision, we talk about a CX experience, what are our IT professionals dealing with? And I'd like to kind of talk about that from this kind of cartoon picture. On the left-hand side, we have something called an ACD, an automatic call distributor. This is when people are calling into your traditional contact center, and you have agents on the phone answering it, or you have an IVR or some self-service bots that are working with the customer. Now, those systems are highly integrated with your CRMs, your customer relationship management systems. Like, what is their historical information, our 360 views, and what have you. And what we see here is when we want to report on it, or when we want to do what we call WFO, or workforce optimization, making sure we have the right amount of agents, the right amount of self-service applications, the right performance that we want. It becomes a very convoluted picture of trying to integrate these things together. When we start thinking about the future, that ACD evolves into something we're going to discuss of what we call the channel engagement engine. Some people have heard about this as CCAS or what have you, but it's really kind of those elements of how to manage those engagement channels. The CRM is really evolving into what we call a managed experience system, and performance management is orchestrated with it. So what's the impact of this? Number one is your IT organization on the left is spending a lot of time integrating and handing off between components. This is really hard to do over time. Everyone can talk about integration, but handoff is actually quite difficult. And what's even worse is if you have to get to a live agent, or they are the coordinator of the interaction, they are the glue of the process. Nothing would happen if the agent wasn't actually doing it. What we now see in a modernized contact center framework is true orchestration. How do these different technologies actually orchestrate together to provide those outcomes that you're envisioning and what you want to drive for a CX experience? And what's also key is your agents now become the human touch on a process, as opposed to being the glue of the process themselves. So now let's kind of take a step and let's look at that channel engagement in general. Again, I'm not trying to make everyone a technologist, so let's just kind of stay at the super high level of 4 macro trends that are happening in that ACD world, or that contact center world. The first one is what we call service delivery. There used to be a world of you put a bunch of computers and servers in some kind of room that was cooled very nicely, that's on-prem, and it was trying to deliver your services. And now we're moving into those cloud-based services. And there's a lot of advantages for IT organizations and the business themselves. There's new financial engineering on how you're actually going to pay for this, consume it, what your price points are, how quickly you can deploy new features, new services, turn them on, turn them off. But one of the biggest keys that you're going to start seeing is what we call elasticity. The ability for your system to instantly get bigger, instantly get smaller, based on what you're trying to provide and based on the demand for your services. From a channel support perspective, most times you're talking to your contact center representative, they are very used to voice conversations. Sure, they've added chat, they've added email and the like, but it's now really about how do you start running a center that it's not just focused around voice. Voice is still very critical to this, but it's really about digital channels and the ability to escalate and de-escalate when possible, but meeting the customer on their terms with a cohesive experience. When we start thinking about when you're engaging your technologist, they are very used to being the center of the universe. You dialed an 800 number and it came into a center. That was their world, and everything else looked as like an adjunct or looked like something they needed to deal with. What the mindset change is happening to those groups is we are now evolving into what we call part of an ecosystem. What does it actually mean to come in through a website, come in through a mobile app, and then still get the same benefits that these channel engagement engines were providing before? And the last part is when we start talking about that solution design. There's a way to take these solutions and integrate them with other technologies. I'm sure as you're codifying all your CX visions, you're talking to a lot of different vendors, you're talking to a lot of different technology solution providers. It's all about APIs, about how you're going to start bringing these things together. And what's absolutely key when we evaluate channel engagement engines, we need to make sure that they're built on the right foundation of an open platform in order to bring those different technologies together to help you drive your vision. So let's look at kind of some of the things that are changing. We like to look at kind of the channel engagement engine when you're interfacing, a client's interfacing with your contact center through kind of a 5-step type of process. The first part is what we call a dialogue. A dialogue is trying to do 2 basic things: figure out who somebody is and what the heck they want. And these things go hand in hand. If you can't identify somebody, you're really limited on the types of services that you could actually provide that client. And if you don't know what that client wants, it's not going to be a frictionless experience. So when we start looking at kind of once we figured out who somebody is and what the heck they want, we need to then figure out the best possible resource in order to deliver the outcomes that that client's looking for. So there's 2 places it can go. One is to automated services. You can think about this as what we call an agentless workflow. Some people think about this as bots. Some people call it an IVR and what have you. Or we might be wanting to be able to move and talk to a live agent if that's what's needed. While you're waiting for an agent, or what we call a match segment, we sit there and we kind of try to figure out what do we want that experience to be while that client is actually waiting for something. And then lastly is once we end up delivering it to an agent, how do we ensure that agent can pick up with that and run with it? And this is where a lot of those really cool next-gen technologies are coming in and helping us optimize out this flow. So going back to that dialogue phase, a lot of times organizations use a phone number to determine who a customer is. But that doesn't really do a great job. It's really easy to fake that. Just because you're calling from a phone doesn't mean that that is the person. That's not the right party connect and what have you. We're now seeing a lot of biometric identification. May it be a voice print, a facial ID, a thumbprint on your mobile device. Because of the mobile device and because the access to all these technologies, we're seeing a lot of that biometric identification and authentication be brought into the contact center in a rapid fashion. When we start looking back in like the 80s and the 90s, to figure out what somebody wanted, you had to start typing it in. Press 1 for sales, press 2 for services, and what have you. Now that we're integrating into back-end systems that have that complete history, we can make some really good guesses. We can leverage AI and machine learning in order to try to figure out what someone's trying to do before they even know what they want to do. That's what we call personalized inference. We're seeing a lot of new technologies being able to grab this from various sources and help someone deliver on intent. You don't have to be perfect for the intent. You just have to have a very high accuracy when it comes to making sure it's a good, smooth experience. And for anything that we got the intent wrong, we'll just manage that on the back end. When we start thinking about segmentation, determining the right resource. Number one, there's obviously more and more self-service applications that are coming up. We would kind of deflect those into our self-service workflows. But if we do need to get to an agent, we are moving away from kind of what we call skills-based routing and moving into something we call work assignment. Skills-based routing was a contact center saying, because I know who somebody is and what they want, I am just going to find an agent who has the right skills to be able to serve that intent. Well, that gets us a far way, but there's a much better way to do it. Work assignment allows us to start bringing in persona. It allows us to start matching on different types of attributes. Let me give you an example, and I know this isn't politically correct, but we developed this. There's an organization that noticed that older gentlemen in New York spent on an average of 18% more money if they were tied to an agent who had a younger female Texan accent. Now, I don't think that's really a skill to serve what their intent was, but now that we can make those matches, we can make a much better integration and a much better conversation, meeting the demands and then increasing revenue at the same time with using attribute-based routing when we start working with work assignment. From a self-service point of view, it's really about agentless workflows. It's a directed dialogue is what we're used to. You have to hit a bunch of numbers to get to your end result. We're bringing in a whole suite of applications that really fall into what we call natural language. It stands for natural language understanding, natural language grammars, natural language intent. Everyone's coming up with new acronyms all the time. But the key is how to have a natural conversation with a chatbot, with an IVR, with a voice recognition system in order to drive your outcomes. Sometimes it's not going to be good enough and you have to escalate, or from what we talked about at the segment phase, we want to actually go to a live agent, we would then queue them. So what does it mean to queue them? The first one is how do you treat them? Typically, you're listening to elevator music and a nice message that comes across saying, your call is really important to us, please stand by. Or you see 3 dots on a chat waiting to get assigned to somebody. We can now start talking about providing different information and bringing in other channels, we call channel deflection or channel augmentation, in order to facilitate while you're waiting, you can get another information. You can actually increase a lot of opportunities in your CX experience if we think through what does it mean while you're actually waiting for a live agent. And finally, when you get to a live agent, we want to move away from just blind screen pops. You pop a screen based on information you collected on getting to that agent, and then the agent has to spend a lot of time either repeating information or being able to have to scan through everything that was provided. We're now moving into kind of that true process automation or that orchestration at the desktop in order to bring together what the channel engagement engine did. So when we start looking at that desktop, this is really where that managed experience system comes in. In the same vein that we just kind of talked about that ACD or the contact center moving to CCaaS, these are some of the evolutionary steps that are happening in a CRM world. The first one is when you're starting to bring in these technologies, your IT organizations used to have the mindset that they had to replace everything they had, all their backend systems in order to deploy something new. But what a lot of these CRM, that's too heavy of a lift. So what a lot of the CRMs are now moving towards is this concept of orchestrating capabilities. You can keep a lot of those core elements in place, but still deliver a next generation type of experience. From a capability focus standpoint, it used to be all about capturing data and then displaying that data. That's really what CRMs were designed to do. What you're now seeing is you're seeing them actually manage the processes. So when we start talking about kind of a CX experience, it's not just how you're going to interact, it's what you're going to do behind the scenes also to improve that interaction. And these managed experience systems are now managing the process, not just capturing them. And that also informs how we're going to do decision support. CRMs are really good at notifications and providing guidance to a self-service application, or more specifically to an agent themselves. What we're actually now seeing is we're seeing a lot of AI and machine learning in terms of allowing us to intelligently automate how those processes are actually happening and then delivering those as part of your CX experience. And the last part is what we call the engagement paradigm. It used to be all about when someone was interacting, it was a new case, or it was an incident, or it was an interaction. These are now pieced together in very intelligent ways to drive new outcomes, drive better customer satisfaction in terms of a customer journey. Every interaction, every incident is part of a journey rather than being held independently. So when you look at it from kind of an agent's point of view, once you get through the self-service and you get delivered to an agent's going to follow a 5-step process. We call initiate, ascertain, engage, handle, and wrap. From an initiate point of view, this is when they're getting that session. Doesn't matter if it's a call, doesn't matter if it's a digital channel and what have you. What we're now seeing is these are not independent events, but part of a journey to make sure it's a cohesive, coherent experience for all of your users. When we start looking at kind of ascertaining what the customer wants, sure, some of that information or that collected content was kind of delivered to the agent in ways that they can consume it. But we're also now bringing in a lot of analytics to help the agent, if they need to, drive the conversation to a different place, to a place that benefits the customer and benefits the business at the same time. It's how we kind of refine the intent and the type of the interaction in order to engage with them in the best possible way. From an engagement point of view, the number one thing that we're seeing is when knowledge or self-guiding processes are built into the process. A lot of organizations are spending a lot of time training their agents on systems, what to do during certain situations, and your customer experience, once they're talking to an agent, is highly influenced by how that agent's going to interact. So their training becomes a huge part of this. Once we start being able to bring in self-guided processes into the engagement itself, that means the amount of reliance on training actually gets reduced, which is a good thing, especially with turnover, and allows you to start providing a very consistent CX experience independent on who they're actually talking to. When they start working on handling all those issues, once they're there in the process, it's no longer about alt tab, and shifting between a lot of windows on the screen. We're seeing what we call contextual workspaces. And these contextual workspaces go hand in hand with the CX experiences you're trying to drive. And then once we're done interacting with the customer, we used to do this thing called after call work, where agents had to do a lot of work to wrap it up and inform all systems what happened. We're seeing that become very automated, and next best actions for those agents and your systems are automatically being done. And the last view that we're going to look at here is performance management. When we start looking at performance management, we can look at this in 4 different dimensions. In the first dimension, when we start looking at reporting and analytics, all of these things that were happening in the contact center was really about counting and modeling. We've now moved into what we call prescriptive insights. What do you want to actually do, and how do you actually improve your CX experiences, not just report on it, not just do analytics? From a workforce management perspective, this is all about how do I make sure I have the right number of agents if I do need to get to a live resource. If I do need to get to a live resource, a lot of these workforce management systems were based on what we call single channel scheduling, or the voice channel. We're now seeing that we can take off, especially with digital channels, what we call workload management. If we effectively do this, that means your CX experiences, if they do need to get to an agent, are going to not be waiting a long time. We're going to have the right people at the right place. And we got to also make sure that the people that are there are doing a good job. That's where quality assurance comes in. We used to kind of make sure that people were doing a good job with what we call supervised coaching. The supervisor would sit there and review calls from the past week and remind someone during a one-on-one session of what they could improve on and what have you. With a lot of automation, a lot of these new technologies, your contact center can get real-time feedback, and you can get real-time feedback on how these agents are really living up to what you want them to do, making sure they are compliant and make sure they're having great interactions with the customers. And then, of course, the voice of the customer is critical also. You can do all the analytics you want on how the interaction went, but we also do need to survey our customers. And we used to kind of deal with survey tools. Press 1 if you're willing to take a voice survey, and press 1 to 5 on some experiences. But we're now evolving into feedback management, which means that we're able to ask different types of questions based on the outcomes of the conversations, and then integrate that highly with how they felt those interactions went along their journey. All right, so how are we going to wrap up this little lunch and learn here? We're going to start talking about that modernized contact center framework of how this all comes together and give a couple examples. The first thing here is I've highlighted 3 colors. The blue color is that channel engagement engine that I talked about before, that dialogue, that segmentation, self-service, match, and delivery. The green part here is really that modernized experience system. How do we initiate and ascertain and handle and engage and wrap those conversations? And in red is really that performance management. What's key here of what your IT professionals are dealing with in order to deliver that vision, there's 3 big things. Number one is there's a lot of moving parts here that they're having to orchestrate together. And we need to get a lot of these technologies in a solid place in order to be able to deliver on these visions. And these visions absolutely have to be an omni-channel experience, meaning that they're not siloed anymore. So when we start looking at different touch points, a lot of these contact centers are obviously, the traditional phone, the mobile device, the smart speakers in homes, computers, and they could leverage any type of a channel. It could be a traditional voice telephony channel, web, apps, social, SMS, and within each of these channels, you can have different media. Some support video, some support just the voice, some provide just text, some allow you to put attachments and pictures and what have you. What's key is we have a common session routing for your entire enterprise. This is what everyone's kind of working through in their technology stacks of how do I look at all of the different entry points into the ecosystem where I want to start delivering these types of experiences. Now, once you have that session routing, as we talked about before, sometimes it's automated. Sometimes it goes to a chatbot or an interactive voice response system, an IVR. How do you do automated work through the channels that they came in? Other times, it's going to get delivered to the desktop of all those things that we discussed before for the agent. What's absolutely key here is that we had to make real-time decisions based on where we wanted to send this engagement and what was going to be the best for the customer and the business. Well, how do we figure out what that was? Well, the first thing is these contact centers are highly integrated with your backend applications and your warehouse of data and all your backend CRMs in order to help with these real-time decisions. And we're obviously reporting analytics and providing insight on are my agents at the right place? Do I have the right amount of agents at the right time in order to deliver this? And this is where AI really comes in strong here, is bringing together, seeing how all these interactions and all these past decisions have driven outcomes. We can then improve our decisioning based on our experiences. Knowledge is going to be key here. It's getting to a workflow and getting to the information. And that information is critical to provide it to your automated systems and to your agent desktop. And with new technology that we have here, there are 3 huge things that are optimizing these CX experiences. The first part is around what we call syntactic parsing. This is the ability to figure out what someone's saying in real time, what they're communicating in real time, and finding kind of keywords, key phrases, key indicators that we want to change intent or create other actions. Telemetry data is being able to be facilitated, especially from the mobile device. What location are you on? Are you moving fast at the time? Where are you? All of this type of telemetry information can now be used as part of creating that customer experience. And the last part is what's called desktop observation. What is the agent doing? And how is that positively or negatively affecting your CX experiences? And then being able to provide analytics and insight across it in order to get much better processes. So let's go through a use case. This is one that we built for a large bank. What they noticed here is they had a client condition on one of their accounts. Something happened. And what they noticed through their AI engines is how to detect that pattern of what happened. We popped that into our decision engineering. The decision engines decided in this case to do channel automation and reach out to this customer because it was a critical issue. And we actually were just going over a voice channel and ringing their phone. The agent was able to answer it, also got a notification over SMS that an incoming call was coming, so they knew that it wouldn't just be a random number that they wanted to ignore or the like. Once they answered this, we were able to immediately, through process orchestration, deliver them to the agent desktop to start discussing their issue. Now, what's key, what happened during this is the customer said some key words during the conversation about their account, which immediately triggered process automation. The desktop drove new knowledge to there, providing next best action for the agent, so the agent knew how to continue the conversation seamlessly. And what we noticed during the conversation is they wanted to provide kind of a visual indication that combined to the voice call. So in this case, we pushed out some SMS information so they could read it while they were talking to the agent all the way through. What you notice here is all of these technologies have to orchestrate together in order to deliver these types of outcomes. Once we do this, we sit there and we see that there's benefits on two different sides. From the agent side, it's a much more streamlined environment. There's no more alt-tab between applications and having the agents be the glue of the process. It's now a converged workspace, which is automatically updating, and the agents can effectively service customers if it actually gets them past your self-service applications, your websites, and your apps. Now, complex processes, you no longer actually have to train all your agents on these because we're automating them behind the scenes, which improves your responsiveness. It's more of a click and done rather than having them navigate very complex processes. Even if those exist in your organization, we can kind of envelop them and make those much, much better. Our agents become much more self-reliant. Rather than asking for help or searching for information, contextual knowledge is now put into the converged workspace and becomes in part of the process. So there's a lot less I need help because the help is proactively given, which means you hire people totally different in your contact centers now. You don't need people to be system proficient. In fact, most CX experiences, system proficiency isn't the key. What's key is being that human touch, that empathy, or being a people expert is really what we're doing. We're seeing a lot more soft skills being able to leverage in a contact center as opposed to just applications and services. Mentoring has changed. You're no longer coaching the yesterday. You're able to provide real-time feedback to your agents, your customer service representatives, in order for them to change and adjust and enhance those CX experiences that they're providing to your clients. And lastly, with all these things together, the agents don't feel as they're an army of one. They're very synergistic on teams. And from a customer experience, customers have a very consistent experience now. There's not a lot of independent interactions. It becomes a very coherent journey because every one of those interactions and incidents all now are part of an overall relationship that you have with the business. It's not just voice only, obviously. It's now about what the customer actually prefers to interact. But the more important shift is really around workflow. It's not just about being reactive anymore. It's about being proactive through all the technology stacks that we already have. The more proactive we are, the better the CX experience and the better that we can actually deal with a journey of when they do want to interact with us. And when they do interact with us, we don't want them searching for knowledge and searching and making workflows very hard. We're making informed choices by bringing that contextual knowledge through a modernized contact center framework to our clients. No longer are your clients just a number or they're somewhere in queue or they're a red, green, yellow dot. They're actually treated like a person because we know about them and we now have the channels to be able to engage them in a coherent, cohesive way. And our next best actions are no longer just generic, they're highly customized for our clients. So with that said, I'd like to thank you guys for your time and open up for a few questions and answers, but hopefully you got something out of your lunch and learn of where contact centers are heading.
Hey, thank you, Greg. That was awesome. Thanks a lot. That was good. I learned a lot, I could say. But, I know we have a few minutes left, but would be great to take some questions from the audience. You can either speak up or you could post in the chat window. Either is fine.
So hopefully that wasn't too technical for everybody. We try to stay at the cartoon level, but hopefully, you're able to kind of understand what your IT organizations are going through and how you can communicate with them in an effective way to kind of deliver those CX experiences that you're codifying and you're trying to deliver for your enterprises.
Yeah, while we wait, maybe I have one question. And I think as you laid it out in terms of whether it's the channel management, the performance, or the managed experience, and I think you took us through the life cycle for an agent. I wonder, in the experience that Eventus has done, how have you seen the skill set of what an agent of the future or the agent of the present look like, right? There seems to be that, on the one hand, you're getting a lot of tools to be more efficient, but you need to be far more empathetic. So could you describe to me what are the changes that you're seeing in terms of a typical call center agent profile as you infuse all these great technologies?
Absolutely, and that's kind of what I was kind of expressing at the end there. Sorry, I was rushing to get done on time, but a lot of times, if you look at the training of how you want your brand to get exposed through the agent, unfortunately, a lot of that time actually ends up being, how do I use the systems? How do I become a system expert? And you're hiring for profiles based on that. What we're now starting to see is when people get this starting to become right in their contact centers, you can start hiring people that are really just good with people. They really have that empathetic approach because the systems behind the scenes become a lot easier. We were working with a large financial customer that was doing student loans. And some of the agents who were able to actually navigate through, it was all green screen. There was tab, function 2, function 5. I mean, I personally observed them and I was blown away. But they had no customer tact. It was just about, how do I actually operate the system? And they were having a really hard time hiring, and attrition clobbered them. What you end up actually noticing is, once you get all these technologies kind of wrapped in an orchestrated fashion, we actually could start hiring people that need a lot less system training, and then it's really about your brand that we can push. And to be honest, that's a lot easier thing to coach for, and that's a lot easier thing to deal with attrition for also.
Awesome, great, that's great. Thank you. I think there's a request to check if you could share this presentation. I think we'll make it available.
Yeah, I don't know the rules around that, but we'll work on that definitely.
Yeah. All right, I think we're at the end of the hour. So thank you very much again, Greg, and thank you, audience, for sharing your time, your lunch time with us. And hopefully this was interesting and took away something from this session. So thanks, everyone. And I think we're back to our main session.